What expensive food or drink did you try and instantly understand why it was pricey? Story 1. There was a local ice cream parlor where I went to college that sold ice cream at $7 a scoop, which is pricey to me since other places I go is like $3 per scoop max. I was kind of skeptical at first BC, how much better could ice cream get really? But it was the best ice cream I've ever had. They sourced their milk locally, and the flavors were the perfect blend of sweet and creamy. Unbeatable 10/10ths would wait 30 minutes in line again for it. Edit. My reply seems to be lost in the sea of comments. The place was called Moonlight Creamery in upstate NY. Story 2, properly cooked halibut. Watching the movie The Menu, the chef at one point berates one of the constant dinner guests for not being able to recall the last meal at his restaurant. It was halibut, the chef. And honestly, having had it, yeah, you shouldn't forget that dish. It's like fish steak, but somehow better. Story 3. I once tried Wagyu beef at a high-end restaurant. The moment it melted in my mouth, I instantly understood why it was so expensive. The texture was incredibly tender, and the flavor was rich and buttery, unlike any other steak I'd ever had. It was a luxurious experience that was worth every penny. Story 4. Ramen noodles, but not the kind you eat in college. I didn't know there was a premium version until I visited Japan, and wow, it's a hearty meal with a way better noodles, a soft-boiled egg, pork, and now it's something I crave. Story 5. Craft beer. I used to be one of those people that only drank whatever the convenience store had, usually with the word light at the end of it. Then I moved to a place that had breweries in close proximity, so I started visiting those. I couldn't believe it. Actual flavor in a beer. It didn't taste like the piss from a nickel anymore, and it's much stronger, in taste and in ABV. I'll gladly spend $13 on a six-pack for something that wasn't mass-produced, and I'm always looking for new twists on my favorite styles. Also, I get called beer snob by my Michelob Ultra coworkers, which is more than fine with me. Story 6. I used to work for a gourmet grocer, and every year they had Copper River King salmon and Red King crab brought in every year. Both were from the first run catch of the season, had never been frozen, and were flown in within 24 hours of being caught. Having the opportunity to try both of those made me understand why it cost as much as it did. Story 7. Wagyu. It also put into perspective how much 16 ounces of Wagyu goes. My friend worked for a steakhouse, and during COVID, after it became clear the shutdown was going to be a while, his boss let him take some steaks to sell, eat, which eventually led to him being a full-time butcher owning his own shop. Back to the Wagyu, though. 2 friends and I cooked up the 16Z ribeye, and sautéed the asparagus in the excess beef fat. My God, it was so good, rich, and unlike any steak I've had in my life. That said, between the 3 of us, that was plenty of Wagyu. I realized then that 1, it was something that justified its value in how good it was, and 2, the actual portion sizing of a steak that well marbled. If you ever find yourself in a position to try Wagyu from a high-end steakhouse, or purchase a cut, I really recommend it just to try it at least once. Story 8. Snow and king crab legs. Not at a cheap buffet, but from a seafood market. The place near me will season and steam it for you. Then get the whole family standing around the kitchen, cracking and pulling out crab meat. It's a perfect combo of rustic, dirty hands eating that is absolutely luxurious. Story 9. An old-fashioned using premium ingredients. I really don't like peated scotch. This bartender offered to make me one using Lagavulin. He guaranteed I'd like. He was right. Edit. For those saying what ingredients an old-fashioned should or should not have, the purist in me agrees. The same purist that says no bourbon exists that's not made in Kentucky. This particular bartender had the belief that the ingredient list is a suggestion and not an end. Story 10. American here. I visited France a few years ago and had chocolate mousse in a little restaurant in Valenciennes. It was so dense and rich. I felt sad because I knew that no mousse I would ever have again would be such a sensual, flavorful experience. I embarrassed my relatives by licking the plate clean. Did not care. Would do again. Story 11. My dad earned his master's in pastry in Germany, where he grew up. Fast forward to him moving to California and marrying my mom. They started and ran a small but very successful bakery and cafe for almost 28 years, before selling it and retiring into the good life. Growing up, I enjoyed every buttery, chocolate sweet treat you could imagine. Whether it was chocolate truffles during the holidays or strawberry Danish during spring, I knew I was eating good. I also learned as a kid that multiple customers made comments on the prices of our stuff. My dad always explained that we get real ingredients from the best places around, and that's expensive, but worth it. So when I was leaving the nest for college and really went off on my own, I started eating cheaper pastries because of broke college life. I noticed very quickly what my dad meant. Call me biased, but you can always tell. Story 12, duck eggs. My sister started raising ducks when they moved out to Washington, mainly to eat the slugs in her garden, and started selling the eggs to a local restaurant for $3 each. This was in the early 00s, and I was still college, so that was completely bonkers to me. She made me a smoked salmon Benedict with a poached duck egg when I visited. Oh my God. Also agreeing with anyone on this list that says top shelf scotch, foie gras, and Iberica jamon. Story 13, sushi. In my 20s, I frequent the gas station grocery store sushi and really enjoyed the mixture of seafood, veggies, rice, soy sauce, and wasabi. But my first time I went to an upscale sushi place where the menu was, trust me, the quality of fish, rice, and the artistry of the chef. You don't get to see that in gas stations. It's truly amazing, and understand why there was a price difference. And then I realized the soy sauce and wasabi I used was to cover the poor quality. Story 14. I once had the chance to try a small serving of a 5-grade Wagyu beef from Japan, and it was an experience I'll never forget. From the first bite, I could tell why it's so pricey. The marbling of the meat was incredible, giving it a melt-in-your-mouth texture that I've never experienced with any other beef. The flavor was so rich and buttery, with a complexity that stayed with me long after I finished eating. It was clear that a lot of care and precision went into raising and preparing this beef, making it worth every penny. Story 15, saffron. The depth of flavor is incredible even from just one teeny strand steeped in water. There was some weird thread on here years ago where someone said they were a personal chef for a rich family and often subbed out expensive ingredients for cheap ones like saffron for turmeric, and how the family never noticed. And I called bullshit on that one because there is no substitute for saffron. Story 16, bread. Good bakery from a standalone bakery. Bread. It can be a chewy sourdough with a thick crust, a French baguette that crackles when you squeeze it, a pillowy, soft Japanese white bread, or anything in between. But the quality difference between an artisan bread from a bakery that bake it that day and what you can get at the grocery store is night and day. Absolutely worth $10 a loaf. Story 17. More expensive wines. I was always someone who said that it wouldn't make a difference from the $10 bottles, but then I actually bought a $70 bottle of wine, and what a difference it was. I'm sure there isn't much difference between like a $500 and $1,000 bottle, but there definitely is at the lower price points. Story 18. I was with a coworker who isn't an adventurous eater and rarely goes for fine dining. We went out for lunch on the boss's dime at a very fine dining spot while traveling. He couldn't find anything on that menu that would work for him, so finally settled on a pizza. I was luxuriating in the symphony of homemade orecchiette when he looked up from the pizza and said, "This is the best thing I've ever eaten. I'm tasting things I've never tasted before, and that's how I know this is expensive." I tried the pizza. It was burrata. He was experiencing burrata. Story 19. I was spoiled. I worked as a chef for 34 years. Almost everything of higher quality is worth the money. Prime beef, over choice and select. Good, unsalted butter. 40% milk fat heavy whipping cream, especially in my coffee instead of half and half. Same heavy cream for Alfredo instead of bechamel. Milk thickened with roux. Cheese. Oh Lord, cheese. Real Stilton, Taleggio, Brie, Chèvre, freshly made buffalo mozzarella. Used to make it myself. Really nice Parmesan, Asiago, Roquefort, etc. God, I miss the cheese. Tea. Had to source some really good tea for an international squash tournament. The English contingent wasn't happy with our commercial brands, so I found the best tea I ever tasted. Damon Frere's. Holy shit, is it good. The English loved it until they found out it was French. Story 20. I'm drinking it right now. I drink more coffee than tea, and my tea palate is limited. I generally like British supermarket tea. The stronger the better, what they call builder's tea. But I was in Paris, and there was a delightful tea shop, and I decided to splurge and buy some expensive tea. I think it was about $30 for a small tin. And my God, it's amazing. Marco Polo tea from Mariage Freres. Even my supermarket builder's palate understands why it's expensive. I pull it out very rarely to make it last. Story 21. I ate at Le Bernardin in NYC. I have never before or since had food like that. I love seafood in general, but every single thing I ate there, it was like, if this is food, what the hell have I been eating all of these years? There was a pea puree with one of the dishes that made me want to cry. It was so good. And dessert had a caramel corn ice cream included that has lived rent-free in my head for the 10 years since I had it. It was absolutely worth every single penny that we paid for it. I will never forget that meal. Story 22. It's already listed a couple times, but my experience with foie gras was something I won't forget. Dinner with a bunch of friends. Guy across the table asked what it was. I explained to him and he said, "Fuck it, I'll get it." I tried a small bite with some wagyu and it was strangely unbelievable. I didn't necessarily like it and couldn't ever eat more than a bite or two of it, but I instantly understood the appeal. This was easily going to be $150/plate dinner, and the foie gras was Thai only thing on the menu without a listed price, so I don't know what it cost, but I could see the premium in it. Story 23. Real cheddar aged 5+ years, oh my god. Growing up in MN and visiting family in Wisconsin and always bringing back loads of Pricey cheese. The consistency is completely different from the extra sharp shit they have in the regular cheese section. I've had 10-year cheddar with a chunky, crumbly, crystalline consistency starting to feel like a Parmesan consistency, but less hard. I just shred it up cold and eat it on chips fresh off the block. You let it sit or melt it. You lose the same fresh flavor and consistency. Story 24. A rich friend of mine in Tokyo took me out for expensive sushi at some local place, which was about $100 for a few pieces, plus a kaisenden. Chef's choice. The people thinking expensive sushi for a rich dude is $100 will understand that my friend wasn't super rich, just rich for me. I am a staunch hater of people who think Japanese culture methods are like the prime example of human skill. I love Japan, but anytime a weeb drags out a piece of Japanese culture out of context to shame his Western peers, I get antsy. Anyways, I always thought sushi is just chopped fish with rice. It is. But there is a difference between a bog-standard piece of tuna and one sliced by a very sharp knife, a fresh fish. The sushi I had in that restaurant was the softest and most delicate, delicious fish I have ever tasted. I would pay the money to do it again. It was then I understood that money can indeed buy happiness. Story 25. Caviar. My parents are foodies, and we were solid, lower to middle class most my childhood. But food they saved up for and splurged on a few times a year. When we moved to SoCal when I was 9, Easter brunch was a big thing for my family, and they found a place down by the coast that became our go-to for years in the 90s. That's where I was introduced around the age of 9-ish to caviar. It was a fancy brunch with fresh seafood, which was why my parents picked it. They loved seafood but only ate it at buffets due to the price. And I, being an adventurous eater, was trying everything I wasn't familiar with that day and happened upon bagel, cream cheese, caviar, and I was done for life. I probably ate double my kid's priced meal in caviar alone and was branching out until I was legit eating it by the small spoonful. My dad, the buffet strategist, declared me the winner of the day. It wasn't super serious, but my dad was the type who was like, "I didn't just pay $40 for you to fill up on fries. Those crab legs aren't going to eat themselves. And you won't get the chance for a very long time, so take advantage of it." Basically, we don't go to these expensive buffets to eat worse quality cheap food than we have at home. We go for the high-value stuff we don't get at home, and for the love of God, don't fill up on filler foods kinda approach. For the next few years before we stopped going, it was my once-a-year engorgement of caviar, and my dad fucking loved it, because I alone was making sure our family was getting their money's worth, ha ha. But for whatever reason I don't remember, the tradition fell off in high school, and I was lamenting one day how much I missed that caviar and asked my dad to get me some. He was like, oh well, you know how pricey that is? We can't afford that kind of stuff. I'll do what I can." And I guess he watched some sales and such and got a tin, which in 98-ish was on sale for like $17, which was big money in the grocery budget back then for them, but he got it for me. And it was fucking disgusting, satly flavorless shit. I didn't make a fuss, but he agreed after trying it and reiterated that the kind of caviar I was really wanting was circa $50 a tin from what he could find. And it was not in the family budget, which I totally got. My dad is awesome. Also, man, I really need to find a buffet with caviar like that again. Ilmao. Story 26. I had lunch at Epicure in Paris a year and a half ago. It was at least 3 times as expensive as any restaurant meal I've ever had. I am no stranger to good food. I used to eat at Chez Panisse regularly because it was my neighborhood restaurant. I've eaten at the French Laundry and Léon de Lyon. I've dined at the French Laundry twice and paid for neither meal, which is the only thing in this post that's actually a brag. This was the best meal I've eaten in my life by an order of magnitude. Every single thing, from the tiny nut tart and the whelk served as an amuse-bouche to the petit fours, was at a bare minimum delicious. The room was beautiful. The staff was unbelievably cheerful, informative, and supportive. The first real dish, a mousseline of halibut topped with smoked caviar, is the most astonishing thing I've ever tasted. The venison was served with a demi-glace that brought us to tears. The salad that accompanied the salmon was like a beautiful hallucination. The desserts were preposterously delicious. It was 4.5 hours of pleasure. It was also shockingly expensive. More expensive than the French Laundry, and this was lunch. I can't imagine what dinner is like. But it was also a once-in-a-lifetime experience. If I win the lottery, I'll do it again. But only if. But to be on topic, with my first bite of that mousseline, I realized that we were getting our money's worth. Story 27. Real balsamic of Moderna from Italy. Harry Sheet, is this stuff expensive, but you will never believe how amazing it tastes. If you're on a budget, you can get something super close at most grocery stores. Just make sure the top ingredient on the label is grape must. Should be around $20, and even this watered-down version will blow your mind. Just don't put it on any that's hot. Heat destroys the flavor. Room temp or lower. Room. Story 28. Went to a wine tasting where the sommelier brought excellent wines in the 20, €80 price range. I'm used to picking €10 and under. For years, I kept saying to my husband how a lot of white wines had a weird aftertaste, like the smell of wet dog. It was the cheaper wines that did it. I did not get that taste with a better vineyard. While it wasn't expensive per se, and I can afford $20-30 a bottle of wine, it changed my perspective and really made me wonder what I was drinking in the cheaper bottles. And I'm all for box wine and Trader Joe's $2 chuck, although isn't it $6 chuck now? For those in America, because they have a time and place, but I'd rather take my time and enjoy what I have in front of me paired with company and dinner. Story 29. I once had a small plate of lightly steamed fresh geoduck sashimi. Incredible. The plate was $80. If you like seafood and have not tried geoduck, please do. It's one of the sweetest, most tender, flavorful sea creature I've ever had. Anything that is prepared simply and without a ton of cooking, such as steaming, is the way to go, because longer cooking makes it tough. I also was able to eat live conch in the Caribbean that our guide dove to get for us. He opened it right there, sliced it with his dive knife, and gave us a piece. Incredible. Words cannot describe it. Story 30. Other people have said this, but Wagyu always thought it was just another thing people hyped up just because it was expensive. No. Got it as an appetizer at a restaurant on a vacation a couple years ago. They bring out a hot stone covered in sea salt and you cook your pieces of meat on it. Maybe a minute each side? I can't recall exactly how long it took to get medium rare. But that first bite, man, I'll never get that feeling again. That understanding. The way it melts in your mouth, the tenderness. I'd drive the 4 hours just for that Wagyu. Funny, the only other food I think about from that trip is Old Bay seasoned waffle fries with onion dip and sriracha ketchup from a dive bar. I'm hungry.